Howdy, y'all. Redneck Lesbian here with more commentary to make my kinfolk fall into paroxysms of horror and prayer, because surely I have been consumed by Satan. They know I'm Satan's handmaid because I've rejected them and their beliefs, which is handy for them, although it makes Satan seem pretty well-rounded. It's nearly June, which is Pride Month, but it also contains Father's Day, which is not something I'm really into. I'm happy for all the people who had great dads and post old photos of them on Facebook with statuses like, "Remembering this awesome dad today. Miss you." Then there are the people who don't post. And you know they're on my side of the fence and would rather not think about it. Honestly, it took me a long time to come to terms with my feelings about my dad. Because where I come from, the Bible says, honor your father and your mother, which is supposed to apply even if they're sociopathic in their treatment of you, I guess. There are other Bible verses that are meant for the instruction of parents, such as, "Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged," which is pretty damn mild. Yes, don't discourage your kids. Instead, only read the verse about sparing the rod and spoiling the child, because evangelicals love that one and constantly use it to defend their mean streaks. Bruises are just fine if you can hide them under your clothing. My dad didn't hit me. He left that to my mother. Her favorite weapon was the belt. No, Dad was always going on about what great parents they were and how lucky I was that they didn't beat me like some other kids' parents do. From an adult perspective, I see this now as kind of a red flag, but as a preschooler, I had no idea. While extolling his own virtues as a parent, he also demanded respect, which usually meant that I should agree with everything he said. I should definitely not point out when he was being nonsensical, contradictory, or childish, because then the volcano would erupt and all hell would break loose. Verbal violence didn't count as real violence, of course, but it was necessary for me to tiptoe around quietly so as not to rouse the beast. Of course, sometimes Mom roused the beast, and he had no problem with unloading on everyone because his anger was a Tommy gun that was directed in 360 degrees at all times. This was spectacular to see on the occasions when he would make his umbrage very public, like when we were in a department store because Mom needed a new vacuum cleaner but he couldn't get a DVD. He apparently wasn't embarrassed by public stares, but he knew Mom and I were. Fun times. In keeping with the white male ethos of the 1750s, 1850s, 1950s, and still today, Dad was theoretically the head of the house, so all his needs trumped everyone else's. Really, our needs weren't even secondary to his. They were irrelevant. This sense of entitlement explains pretty much everything, including his eruptions. I think I was 5 when I was using the lone bathroom in the house, attending nature's call. As fate would have it, Dad also had to attend to his daily constitutional. He could have let me know he was waiting in a calm manner, and I was hurrying anyway. Instead, he began to bang on the bathroom door, demanding that I get out now because he had to go. I suppose he scared the literal shit out of me. He put a hole in the door. Yes, I'm so glad you're such a good parent, Daddy. These examples weren't unusual, but my perspective changed as I matured. I believe I had no choice but to mature more quickly in this household, if for no other reason than to raise myself. I remember very clearly my father screaming at me that he not only wanted my respect, but by God, I demand it. And I simply thought at him, "No, asshole, you'll have to earn it." And he never did. It takes a while for a kid to untangle gaslighting when there are two sides to a person, a sort of Jekyll and Hyde, if you will. When Dad wasn't being Mr. Hyde, he could play at being all charming and dad jokey and "I love you" while applying a Vulcan death grip to my shoulders. My parents aren't good huggers, so I guess he thought pinching my shoulders until I flinched was, all right. I do say play at being charming because he totally thought he was. But I quickly learned to read a room, and my dad's cheerful conversation was often didactic and brash, not too subtly implying that the receiver might, in fact, be an idiot if he disagreed with him. I wish I'd had more tables to hide under over the years. I'm pretty sure, though, that this feature of his personality is why he'd been fired at least twice. As a result of my father's excellent parenting, I distrusted all adult males. This began when I was at least 3. The fathers of my playmates were scary, and at least one such father erupted at me, therefore confirming my bias. I have a whole bevy of uncles on my mother's side, all of whom have much the same manner as their psycho father, which essentially meant that they were scary people to me too, with one exception. One uncle was more like his mother, and I grew to trust him, but you could take the rest. I suppose it was my Freudian longing for a loving father that drove me to date at least 3 major male assholes in early adulthood. I, of course, chose to marry the one who most resembled my father in temperament. Even at the time, I wondered how I had managed to choose the exact opposite of what I wanted. Self-centered, temperamental, and prone to rages? Check, check, and check. What the actual fuck? Of course, I divorced him later, once I met my current wife, who is absolutely nothing like either of my parents. She's a wonderful, loving person, and I have to admit that there's still part of me that's uncomfortable with feeling loved. I mean, really loved, not Hail Mary pass loved. It's a sad truth that people raised in toxic environments find that non-toxic situations are uncomfortable. It's a process to change that. I think of myself as a caring, compassionate person. I can see my parents and their children and what a mess they are. I understand why they are who they are. I just don't like it. I don't want to be around it anymore. I don't have to be around it anymore. But it was still difficult for me to acknowledge the depths of anger that I have about it. In fact, it was only recently that I've allowed myself to say that I hate my father. Objectively, I hate him. He's a horrible person with beliefs completely contrary to my own. He hates the gay community, which must mean he hates me. He's racist. He once told me that he ain't having no black grandchildren. He treats people horribly. He lies with impunity. And my personal history with him is a train wreck. But honestly, it doesn't matter why I hate him, I just do. I find it interesting that we're trained not to hate people, yet of course most people do on occasion. Some people have very bad reasons for hating people, such as race or gender. And some people just have a history with individuals that invokes the feeling. Good people, of course, don't want to hate other people, because then you're not a good person, right? But I found that the only way out is through, and to get there, I have to acknowledge that, yeah, while I may understand him, pity him, have compassion for him, I also hate him. This hate is coming from a deep anger that is as old as I am. So now that I'm in the open acknowledgement stage of this elephant in the room, I see a whole bunch of feelings that I wasn't allowing myself to see before. The why couldn't you have questions are popping up. Why couldn't you have ensured that I went to a decent school? Why couldn't you have asked me about my interests? Why couldn't you have acted like I mattered? Why, Daddy? Why? I cut off both of my parents almost 15 years ago. Trust me, I have issues with my mama too. They're just different. A few years later, I gave a talk about the inner child at a Unitarian church. It was Father's Day. A few days later, both of my parents showed up on my doorstep with an uncle and aunt in tow, completely unannounced and uninvited. I knew, of course, that my mom's idea was to show up, then I'd have to let them in, and I'd have to behave in front of the aunt and uncle, and then we'd all pretend like nothing had happened. Instead, I closed the door on her and my aunt and uncle. Standing alone in our driveway beyond the walk was my father. He wasn't brave enough to come onto the porch because he already knew. He knew how I felt, but he did it anyway. Showed up. He just couldn't face the consequences. It was sadly typical. I haven't seen him since. For all the people who are horrified at what I just said, I get it. You probably had a relatively happy family and childhood, and you know what? Good for you. I am sincerely happy for you. But don't judge other people. As Steinbeck said, there are some among us who live in rooms of experience we can never enter. Some kids have had it worse than I did. Sometimes our parents are just the vehicles that bring us into the world. The relationship piece is optional. So, thanks, Dad, for your part in getting me here. I know you did the best you could, but I also understand now that I deserve better than your best. Happy Sunday in June, everybody. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can send comments and questions to rednecklesbian2020@gmail.com. Enjoy the barbecue. Bye, y'all.